David Brin is next. He is a scientist and an award-winning science fiction author. He earned a PhD in physics from the University of California, San Diego as a student of Nobel laureate Hans Alfvén, and his scientific work ranges from astronomy and optics to human evolution. Meanwhile, his novels have been New York Times bestsellers and have won the Hugo, Nebula, and other awards. At least a dozen have been translated into more than 20 languages. His 1989 eco-thriller called simply Earth foreshadowed global warming, cyber warfare, and the World Wide Web. The 1998 Kevin Costner movie The Postman was based loosely on his novel by the same name, and his nonfiction book, The Transparent Society, won the Freedom of Speech Prize from the American Library Association. David serves on numerous advisory committees dealing with subjects including national defense, space exploration, the search for alien life, and philanthropy. Today, he will address the question of how optimistic futurists can most effectively communicate with those who are creeped out by talk of transcendence and life extension. Please welcome David Brin.
Hello, everybody, and good morning. I'm going to do something highly unusual. I give about 30 speeches per year, but I usually wander all over the place and leap and hop and dance. And this time I think I'm going to read it because there's so much PowerPoint. Where's this thing? All right. In event, it's thrilling to join you brainy alphas sharing insights and eagerness for a boldly transformed human destiny. As most of you know, I'm one of you. Having explored non-human, transhuman, extraterrestrial human, exotic prospects in books and media, but you folks don't need another cheerleader for the singularity today. As an ornery contrarian, my job is to be poking at the opposite or the downsides of whatever group I'm with, a shining light on problems, and my, you have plenty of them. So I plan to poke, and some of you will not be happy, especially you new atheists out there, because I propose to teach you how to talk to your worst adversaries in the midst of a culture war that's getting deeper and deeper in our nation, in our civilization, more and more resembling phase 3 of the American Civil War. You need to learn how to talk to your worst adversaries, break up their coalitions, as Jason Silva's outreach that we learned about yesterday is an attempt to do to those who are young and might be swayable towards looking toward the future. You are the smart ones, supposedly, so you should be able to learn to speak several languages. And one of the problems that we face is waves of nostalgia. This is not the first time this has happened. As a matter of fact, we are the exception. We are the exception who take a forward-looking attitude towards where utopia and better days might lie. Now, you might say, all the past religions believed in better days. I don't count that. If it's a transcendent, sudden end of the world and leading to transcendent bliss, I don't consider that to be a look-forward view to a better human, managed human civilization. I consider that to be another version of the look-back mentality. If you turn a person's gaze from past to future, then he or she becomes a potential ally, whatever differences remain. In an era when science and the very notion of progress are under attack, we do need to keep fighting for a modern, courageous, ambitious, problem-solving civilization. That's a daunting task. If it were easy, the galaxy would be filled, as we saw discussed by Max's paper at the end of yesterday's session, the galaxy would be filled with signs of prior success stories. For 30 years, I've collected theories to explain the Great Silence, as I coined it back in the 1980s, what later was called the Fermi paradox. And I have to say, Max, you oversimplified it a bit last night. Having collected 150 possible, and these are just the plausible or possible explanations for the Fermi paradox, but it is clear that something is keeping the numbers down. Some, like Max, think that the explanation is is a filter that suppresses the factors on the left side of the Drake equation, leaving a galaxy that's open for us to explore and to make our own. These uniqueness proponents are opposed by those who focus on factors on the right side of the Drake equation. They think a filter is waiting for us in the future. But one thought is especially alluring. What if what if we're the first to make it all the way? Well, then our can-do problem-solving zeal may not only save humanity, but perhaps even light up the galaxy. But it won't be easy, nor will it fall into our laps. We need to use humanity's most recently evolved organs, the ones that fold in the very last moments of the prenatal period and still continue to take shape during teenage years. This explains teenagers. The most recently evolved organs, the paracingulate sulcus that lets us evaluate memory accurately, and the prefrontal lobes that are our future probing lamps on our brows. We know this because people who've had prefrontal lobotomies remain intelligent and conscious, again segueing to yesterday, but they lose interest in projecting what Einstein called the Gedanken experiment, the thought experiment. What would happen if I did this? What would happen if I tried to run this yellow light? And so this is one reason why I'd rather have a free bottle in front of me than a prefrontal lobotomy. The point is that even those who get the memory and have their access to to both memory and foresight, even they divide between those who are optimists and grouches. I feature this fellow in the lower right. I've turned him into a character in my new novel. Seemed justice. In any event, you divide into optimists and grouches, which actually brings us back to those 150 explanations for the Great Silence. Things that most often thwarted human advancement were societal: oligarchy, secrecy, rejection of the very idea of progress, the pyramidal social order, which took reign in almost 99% of human societies in the last 6,000 years. All of these were drivers of renunciation. Renunciation is the great temptation, relinquishing rapid advancement for the sake of order. Oligarchs especially like renunciation. Rapid progress destabilizes power arrangements, explaining today's war on science, and in the past explaining feudalism. If you wage war on all the intellectual castes in a society, all that's left standing are the oligarchs. But let's be honest, the left has its own grouchy voices, claiming that we can only save ourselves by adopting restrictive pastoral lifestyles. Very, very smart book, except until you get to the prescriptions. And every time the public is frightened by something, cynical forces will exploit the panic to ratchet up control. This is what the Transparent Society was to a large degree about. Is this a new problem? Not at all. I urge you to watch this great old classic from the 1930s, Things to Come, to see how deeply many of our grandparents were sincerely worried about the similar problems, and in some respects, thinking about them more deeply than we do. But this problem of fear-driven renunciation goes back even farther, and it should worry all of you would-be God-makers. Think about that term, because that is exactly what your agenda is, except for those of you who wandered in off the street. And boy, were you in for a surprise. Nothing in New York surprises you. What should be your top priority as God makers? How to design this, how to design that, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. No, your number one priority should be to avoid the fate of one of the earliest singularitarians, Giordano Bruno. You are the sapient, logical ones, right? Find ways to connect to people who might burn you at the stake, like they burned guys like you in every other culture, like they burned me in every previous life. I remember, every single one, I had this personality. I never got past 16. You guys in this Enlightenment civilization let me grow old, have kids. Whoa, I am loyal. Okay, so how do you do that? What you do is you understand them. And so we come to a slide you did not expect. Look, I promised I'm a contrarian. This is what I do. I'm going to show you a slide that you never expected to see at a summit of God-makers. And there it is. Millions view this as the core postulate. Deriding their priorities only solidifies culture war. It plays into the hands of the cynical people who are manipulating your neighbors. You need to be able to understand the cultural keystones that underlie your own culture. You need to be able to learn to speak another language. So consider the lesson of judo. Stun them that you know this stuff. Use the mythology to draw them toward the light. And so let's dive in. Let's start at the beginning. The very first thing that happened in the relationship between the first man and his creator. And the Lord brought them unto the man to see what he would call them. And the man gave names to all the beasts. It's a stunning moment, neglected by theologians, who generally toss it aside as something cute and irrelevant. 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 Oh, by the way, that's one of the names that he gave one of the beasts, a very large one. The first interaction, the only one that preceded all the complex aggravations like sex, sin, and all the subsequent surus. I know in this town you'll know what that means. What better hint at what we were made for than the only act that wasn't about repairing and salvating and all that stuff after sin? For we weren't asked to pray, but to perform an early act of naming things. And let there be no mistake. Naming stuff is godlike power. Ask any physics student who contemplates Maxwell's equations and knows that thus there is light. What is the act of naming things other than an apprenticeship in co-creation? And what is that apprenticeship other than science? The naming of far moons, of hidden molecular codes, of millions of never-before species. The act of grubbing in the mud underneath an alkaline lake and coming up with new beasts to name. The sheer purity of this moment, the only pure moment in the Bible, free of all sin, is evidence of what we were for. All right, then things got complicated. Sin happened according to the mythos believed by millions of our fellow citizens. Even so, are they interpreting these events correctly? This is where you get aggressive. You get in their faces and you cite scripture at them, and they know they can't cite science back at you. It's really aggressive, and I have found it extremely effective. It rocks them back, and generally, if you say it in friendly tones, they go, I'll have to think about that. And they're no longer your enemy. They're somebody to argue scripture with. The point is, they're not interpreting these events properly, even in their own context. Remember, you are all descended from priests and rabbis who handled this stuff with ease. It should be trivial for you alphas to have a look at these cultural keystones and show your neighbors the light. Take this passage. The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Become like us? Hold that thought. Let it seed what it means. But this one's even better. The italicized part of this should be taken up by you God-makers as your motto. He must not be allowed to reach out and take also from the tree of life and eat it and live forever. Just take that part, starting with the word reach, and make it your motto. I know some of you all are scribbling notes right now. Crumb, there it is. Put aside the he must not part for now. Hold it. What all this says is that man is inherently capable of using knowledge to be like God and to live forever. Half the battle over what we're inherently made to be capable of is settled. Now we're only haggling over when it's right. Maybe it wasn't time yet for Adam and Eve. Only then came another crucial event that theologians mostly ignore. Incredibly important event. The Tower of Babel story is shrugged aside, tossed into a pile of tales about the price of human sin and the price that humans must pay for hubris and arrogant pride. But take a look at what it says. And the Lord said, "See, they are all one people and have all one language. This is only the start of what they may do, and now it will not be possible to keep from them any purpose." There it is again. A combination of two important themes. One, humanity is inherently godlike with limitless potential to achieve anything with cooperative effort and the power of words. It's right there, utterly inarguable, but so is point two, that it was something that God felt needed to be prevented. As when Adam and Eve were expelled from Eden because they just might grab the fruit of the tree of life, or when mankind was cast into confusion, speaking a million separate tongues, leaving the tower in ruins. But even here, consider, was it to be prevented forever? If so, why make us this way? The old question. Or else, might those expulsion and the confusion have been limited measures applied to those situations, ways to stymie and prevent us from achieving those things too soon? Well, we're about to test it. Soon, as many of us have depicted in fiction decades ago, language will be no barrier anymore. One worldwide culture will, we hope, both unify us and enhance our individual eccentric creativities. The new tower that we're building, Tower of Babel that we're building, is no simplistic ziggurat, but a flat, broad foundation for ambition that will assert every godlike power that our inherent natures equip us to pursue. Along with, we can pray and hope, the wisdom to do it right. But make no mistake, this is the thing frightening our neighbors. It is what underlies the war on science that is being cynically manipulated by evil men out there who want it for the sake of their attempted oligarchic putsch that's aimed at ending the Enlightenment. It is what will propel a rising movement for renunciation and possibly eventually people burned at the stake. It is one possible explanation for the great silence, if this happens a lot out there. They are terrified of sharing the inevitable punishment for all this arrogance and hubris, and given their axioms and postulates, can you honestly blame them? But their postulate is wrong. It's wrong even in terms of their own sacred texts, because God never actually punished us for hubris, ever. Let's compare two kinds of events. Like when the Old Testament God got really, really mad at cities where men buggered children and sold their daughters and stuff like that. Hot-tempered stuff, fire from the sky, drowning absolutely freaking everybody, pillars of salt. How were Adam and Eve punished? Okay, you kids, you think you're so smart, go get jobs. The Tower of Babel, not now, kids, not yet. Disperse, experiment in diversity in 10,000 lands, become many, make mistakes, learn. A key point. Nowhere in the canonical Hebrew book of Genesis is there a single word of actual wrathful anger toward either Adam or the tower builders. Now, in fairness, later writers in the Talmud, the Quran, the Book of Mormon reinterpret God's reaction as genuinely angry. But there is not one whiff of actual rage in the actual core source story, just calm deliberation and decision. They will be able to do this. Let's stop them, or possibly stop them for now. Thwarting, but with minimal force, and just with the distraction of new tasks. Hence, this clear and unarguable interpretation. Ambition isn't punished as sin, it is rewarded with challenge. All right, well, they're going to argue with you, the smart ones, they're just blinking at you. But they're going to argue with you with the respect of somebody who's taken on their bailiwick. And it's an assertion that is worthy in scriptural terms. I've just supplied a whole list of amazing points, all of them supported by Scripture. You're not supposed to give a lot of words on PowerPoint, but I'll do it anyway. That should help you engage in lively tussles with your cousins, uncles, fellow citizens. Even if you fail to convince even one of them, you'll have still done what alphas ought to do, used a tiny sliver of your giant brains to reach out to demonstrate that you can cross the divide and speak their language, thus proving your superiority. And maybe they are now behooved to visit your realm a little bit. And the thing that I find most effective is you find a railroad cut not far from your town and invite some of them along to actually show them the sedimentary layers. There goes the 6,000 years. To be curious, to shift frightened minds, to ease the kind of fevered populist fear that evil men may someday use to burn you at the stake. And because, why not? It's interesting, especially for would-be makers of gods. Shouldn't you be thinking about this not only to reach out to your neighbors and prevent you from being burned, but because you're going to be going through these issues yourself with the AIs that you create. All right, well, I won't go down the main list. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Naming is science, and we're good at it. Our potential is unlimited, even conquering death. It's right there in Scripture. Regular obstacles are toppling, as if in a training program. God's obstacles weren't punishment, they've just delayed things. And it's possible he's going to delay it again. He won't use language because we got these things now. He'll use something else. It's possible. It could happen. So, we're doing what we're built to do, and we're going to take it on. It's time for another Tower of Babel. It's time. Now, there are other questions that I could go into in discussing all these other battles. The Book of Revelations. I think that this fixation on the Book of Revelation is one of the most loathsome things that's happened to our neighbors lately. There are other ways. Do you know that Martin Luther didn't even want it included in the Bible? You cite to them the studies that did the rhythm patterns, computerized rhythm patterns of the Book of Revelations, and showed that the closest thing was the ravings of schizophrenics. Perhaps you can help them turn to other parts of the Bible. But the simple answer to the Book of Revelations, whenever people cite it at you, is Jonah. Very, very simple. Right there in Jonah it says God can change his mind. Even if the Book of Revelations was a true prediction in Patmos in 100 AD, he changed his mind. That's the absolute simplest. Cut off at the knees. It's over. It's not over for them, but it certainly gives you a chance to give them a smug look. There are so many of these things that we could go into. Lovely ways of making your fellow citizens stare and blink. And here's the interesting thing. Even if you skewer them with these things, they're more friendly with you after this because you spoke to them in their terms and their language. So, but what I want to point out one thing is whether you are atheists or techno-deists, you are already theologians because you plan to create what any other generation would call gods. Some of you hope to become gods. So justify it, sell it, protect yourself from mobs and relate to them. Prevent the renunciation that will prevent your dreams from coming true. Even if you despise religion, stop overreacting. These cultural keystones matter. They are metaphors. They are useful. Use them. And here's one especially effective. The comparison of prayers. Say you are a creator who came up with Maxwell's equations and Bernoulli principle and quantum mechanics. What would you consider to be a better prayer? Oh, you're so great. Oh, you're so big. Oh, you're so great. Oh, you're so big. Please don't squish me. Some of you recognize the irritated reaction that such a creator has on the left side from Monty Python's Holy Grail. Or some students in a chemistry class doing a titration they had calculated the night before. And it all pops out at them and have them say, oh, that's nice. Well, thank you. I was kind of proud of that myself. It's good of you to notice. I mean, for heaven's sake, I mean, which would you prefer? You would be God makers. Okay, so there's lots we could talk about. This could go on and on and on for about an hour or hour and a half. But I don't want you guys to think I'm a fanatic on this other side. I'm a fanatic contrarian, and I poked at you with this stuff. Believe me, I'm there with the whole base theorem and the construction of AIs and the complex issues of what AI will be like. As a matter of fact, I use AI in my new novel more extensively than I can think of anything else I've read recently. But I wanted to do this here because I was among you guys. So I have a couple more slides I might get to real quick if the topics come up, but I'll open it up for questions.
We do have a few minutes for questions. Before we get to that, a quick announcement. We have, for members of the press especially, we have several little press chats today. David and Sharon will be in the press room immediately after David's talk. Later at 10:50, Dilip George and Scott Brown will be there. They are speaking later this afternoon. They are the founders of an AI company. At 1:30, we have Riley Crane. And at 1:50, we have David Ferrucci and Dan Cerruti. They're from the IBM team. So with that, let's open it up to questions for David Brin. Here's one on the right side.
Hi, I'm Rick Shuang.
Hi, Rick.
Which of your books or what reference would you give us to us who have lousy memories to what you've said here?
Oh, well, I'm sure that these will be posted, right?
The videos.
Yeah,
we've got 4 camera angles.
Yeah, the videos, well, The Heart of the Comet has a little bit of theology in it. Actually, now that I think about it, actually a large fraction of my sci-fi novels have little rambunctious theological pokes in them. Well, why not? I mean, after all, fiction writing is the one purest form of magic, in that we've persuaded civilization to train 95% of people out there to skillfully decrypt our incantations of little black squiggles and turn them into star-spanning explosions, deep human insights, and philosophical maunderings. I mean, there's nothing that makes a guy more arrogant than to be the god of a fictional universe. So, yeah, sure, there's theological things in Heart of the Comet and in Earth. Yeah, especially at the end of Earth. Anybody?
Next question, back left.
Hey, David. My name is Mark with thesingularity.com. I want to thank you for your insights. And just to say that, my dad went to Berkeley, master's in mathematics, and worked on the Apollo mission. My mom was from the heart of the South. And having that dual parent situation made me see both sides of the thing. And it's kind of a passion. I guess you could say I'm a believer, kind of for both sides. And to this crowd, I just want to say, for believers, I think that we have been very rude, to say the least. And I want the singularity.com to be a place where, rational discussion can happen, because I think that the singularity is really a very, maybe likely thing.
Well, I'm not asking anybody to believe any of this. What I'm asking is for you to understand the culture that you're coming from, and to be able to talk to people and ease them away from this treasonous culture war phase of the American Civil War that they've been tricked into. And one way is by getting them to realize, hey, scientists, we may be really, really smart and know a lot of stuff, but that doesn't make us evil.
Amen.
Over here on the right
thank
side.
You, David.
I'm sorry, you had a follow-up?
No, I was just saying that's what my website is going to be. If there's people in the scientific community who would like to discuss, and present this aspect, that's
Singularity.com?
Thesingularity.com.
Thesingularity.com. Terrific.
Over here on the right.
So I just wanted to know if you had any advice for...
I'm sorry.
Sorry. Okay, so you talked a lot about an apprentice creator and how that could be fun and interacting with, the enemy, whatever. I just want to know, do you have advice for when it's not fun? Because as an economist in the government, I talk about blogs and how they're the future of economics, and I get a lot of raised eyebrows and that can't be true. And yesterday I was really hurt to hear one of the speakers say that government just can't be a source of innovation anymore because nobody in government tries to innovate. So I'm just curious, like, for people who are trying to speak the language and interact with people who are afraid of the singularity, like, what do you do when it's not fun?
Oh, it isn't necessarily fun to be Giordano Bruno. He kept trying and trying and trying, and people gave him shelter until finally the shelter failed. I mean, and that intimidated Galileo. Look, sometimes symbolism really matters. The one thing that I would love for somebody to fund is to go up in the same square next to the national debt clock and set up a national debt clock that shows what the national debt of the federal government would be if we had charged a decent royalty for communication satellites, the internet, and all the pharmaceutical research and all those things. If you had that clock, it doesn't have to actually matter that much, the details and the specifics. I think it would have a salutary effect upon people. George Marshall's plan was to set up a Pax Americana where we would lift the world, the only international pax that did not have a mercantilist trade policy favoring the home, but instead bought from everybody. And we uplifted the world through Walmart. Trillions of dollars of crap we never needed to buy. And we are now lifting China and India at the same time. How did we pay for this? Each decade we gave to the world some huge new technology that we benefited from so we could be the goose that laid the golden egg. And this happened in the 90s with the internet, the 80s with telecommunications, but it did not happen at all in the 21st century. Perhaps biotech will do it. But we're missing a decade of America just saying, look at this, and then being able to pay for Walmart and developing the world. And I could have gone on about that for an entire hour.
And I think your questions could go on for an hour too, but unfortunately we are out of time. Thank you very much, David Brin.
Sure.